I am Helen Wright, Senior Impact Manager at the Dixon Poon School of Law, King's College London. Welcome to Research in Action, our new podcast bringing you research from the Dixon Poon School of Law community, which is shaping law, policy and society. Hear conversations with leading experts from King's College London and beyond, as they reveal how their work impacts the world. Our academics aren't just working to address today's most pressing legal challenges, they are driving the debate. Hello. Welcome to Research in Action. In this episode, we're talking to Lloyd Gash, who's Senior Lecturer in Law at the Dixon Poon School of Law, King's College London. This episode is exploring the development of Accident, which is a collaborative law and theatrical project led by Lloyd in partnership with dramaturg Bryony Thomas and the King's Players Student Theatre Society. It focuses on how a real legal case was transformed into a fictional stage production to examine questions of justice, responsibility and interpretation. Welcome, Lloyd. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for having me.
I know a lot about Accident. I've had the pleasure of seeing the play probably about maybe 6 weeks ago when it was staged by the King's Players at King's. It's fantastic. But for the benefit of everybody listening, can you explain what Accident is without any spoilers?
Sure. Well, for the benefit of everyone listening, you were much more than an audience member, Helen. So thank you for all of your input on the project, wearing your Impact Seed Fund hat. That was very, very much an important part of how it got to where it got. In terms of the play itself, as you say, it is a fictionalization of a case that took my interest arising from various teaching initiatives over the last 10, 11 years. It's about a tragic series of events involving two families, and there was an emotional and romantic affair at the heart of this tragedy. But I won't be spoiling things by saying that it ended with the death of one of the family members. As a consequence of the actions, I think I'm at liberty to say, of the person who ended up being charged with his murder. There was an Old Bailey trial, which is the first act of the play. It's not a whodunit, it's a did he do it? And the Act 2 content moves from the criminal courts in the Old Bailey, which is our most famous Crown Court. It moves from the criminal justice process into the civil justice system when the widow of the deceased brings an action in damages against the accused in the criminal proceedings, who becomes defendant in the civil proceedings. So I've been dancing around that answer, Helen, with that to not give the spoilers
tricky
for anyone who wants to come along and watch what will hopefully be the next run of it.
And what first sparked your interest in the play, in this legal case, and rather than analysing it as part of academic or a legal format or within your teaching, why the play?
It struck me from speaking about this case to law students in classrooms that they were particularly interested in it. And I think what was piquing their interest was the fact that, relatively unusually, it's a case that involves both our justice systems, as criminal and civil. And for that reason, I started talking about it to non-specialist audiences in the context of things like widening participation events, outreach talks, in kind of formal education settings, but also with my personal contacts, friends, family. It became quite clear to me that there was a very real interest in the case. That didn't automatically lead me to pointing towards a theatre production, but it did very much confirm to me that there was some sort of public legal education element to this case that should be explored. Where theatre came into play, excuse the accidental pun there, is the university I was working at the time had a wonderful drama school, and I was part of the quality assurance team for that school. And I wondered whether there was a possible synergy between the law students and the drama students, whereby a skills swap could get this performed in, and the theatre, the stage that we had at that institution seemed to me the perfect place for it, within the confines of what we had. I'm still not resolved on whether the best place for this as a piece of art is the stage, although I'm pretty convinced of that now. But that was to answer your question. I knew it needed to reach a wider audience, and that was the most fertile opportunity at the time. So had discussions with colleagues in the drama school, and we started the kind of foundations for thinking about how to move forward with this. And then for various reasons, it sort of went a little bit on the back burner, if you like. And my interest was completely reignited when I attended a seminar convened by a group called Connecting Legal Education. So I heard a talk from a wonderful academic, Elizabeth Connigan, at Reading Law School. She was co-presenting on a play project with her students. Now, that was a piece of theatre arising out of teaching activities in connection with the post office scandal that has now become a touring production. But the energy and the joy and the pedagogical impact just came right through that talk, that seminar. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this a go. So that was the big push. And that was when I was at King's, so 2023. And I thought, why not reach out and apply for some funding to actually move this forward and pick up those ideas that I'd had at a previous institution. And I'm delighted to say that the answer to my original application, my application to the Impact Seed Fund, it was answered with a yes, and then things just gathered apace from there.
In terms of that sort of legal education, creativity, sort of what new insights, what is it that this does, that what new things does this bring? Does that doing the play in this way and working in this? I was sat in the audience actually, and there were legal students nudging each other, going, "I know what that means." I know what that means. I understand that. So it's that clearly. So, but I think there's more to it than just. It's a new way of thinking about things, sort of building on sort of this creativity and what they can learn. So, what are the new insights that you think you've gleaned through doing it in this way?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Helen, and that's really pleasing, and that's coming out in the responses actually to the questionnaires. There's an anonymous questionnaire as part of the post-production research. It also involves interviews with cast and those involved from that side. And actually, it goes in both directions. We have those involved in the production saying that they started with the characterization and the emotional journeys of the characters, without really thinking about the law, and then as they learned the roles and the lines, started reflecting on the legal principles. So kind of reverse journey, and the law students starting with the legal principles having been learnt in the classroom, moving into contextualizing that with an empathetic understanding of the effects of the lives of these cases on the characters involved. And I think the really interesting space that I hope to explore through the progression of these initiatives is, where are the really interesting boundaries for where those two journeys meet in the middle and cross over, and what can students of law learn from students of drama and vice versa. And that's something that I'm currently in a project now with the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama to try and shine a little bit more light on just that. So in terms of new things, I think one of the big research questions coming out of the project is, what does this offer us that can't be done in the classroom? Or at least, what does this offer us that isn't being done in the classroom? And what can we do to give law students, new opportunities to work with dramatic tools? And also, again, from the other side, for non-law students who want to get into the legal world a little bit more, because it's a treasure trove of stories, narratives, and really interesting concepts. How will this kind of initiative help them without them necessarily having to do legal modules?
I thought one of the things I thought was really interesting about the production itself, and that it was the patterns of speech, because the legal language and the range and the tone was it's very dramatic in itself, and I found that really they just seem to marry so well. Has it changed your teaching?
Absolutely. And Seb, I just want to pick up on something you've said there, just to clarify for the listeners. Some of the content in the production is verbatim. And when I say verbatim, that's a new concept I've learned in my journey to learn more about what it is to study theatrical arts. Verbatim theatre is where a script and actors performing that script use the words that were being used in the original. In this context would be case, but could be all sorts of different processes. So the verbatim aspects of this case are the judgments themselves. Okay, so in both the first, well, actually, no, it's pretty much all in Act 2, forgive me. The literal words that the judges used are represented, and some of that gorgeous judicial language comes through that. So I can't take full credit for that. In the first act, I have dramatized the evidence, the way that the lawyers interact with each other and interrogate the witnesses, and that is supposed to be quite realistic. But it's the second part that's verbatim. So I just thought that context might be helpful. You asked me how it's changed my approach to teaching. I think perhaps the first thing that comes to mind to that question is I used scripted theatrical devices for the first time last semester. So at the time of recording, it's May 2026. So in the September through to December semester, with my cohort that are on our master's program in law and professional practice, they take a module called litigation practice, so basically dispute resolution. And as part of that, I introduced a script that I had written over the summer, and I asked students to perform it in various capacities. So some of the groups, they could choose how they wanted to do this, did read-throughs around the table, some line by line, some character by character. And in one of the groups, because it just so happened that the cohort contained students with training as well as passion, they did a full performance in the workshop, which was just wonderful. I just sat back with a big smile on my face and watched them get under the skin of this problem that I was representing in the script, or hoping to represent in the script. Now, all the groups engaged with it lock, stock and barrel. So that was the first of my fears was kind of allayed, which was good. The group that performed it as actors, having rehearsed to some extent, they only had the papers for a week. The ensuing discussions following that performance went to a very, very sophisticated place, and there was a lot of energy, a lot of buy-in from the rest of the students in the room. And I think there's a connection there. I really think that performance will lead to better critical discussions.
And do you have any idea why that? Any thoughts, initial thoughts about why that might be?
It's a representation of a space that provides a platform for empathizing with the characters. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. You could have a more traditional set of discussions about, what put yourself in the position of claimant or defendant or witness. How do you think they would feel? But I think that's an easier question to ask if you've seen a representation of that. Now, that comes with all sorts of other aspects, which is, would you emotionally follow the way that the actors are portraying something, rather than having a fully detached view of how you think the emotions of the characters might play out? But the fact that theatrical devising and film and other forms of media, theatre productions, are so popular, I think speaks for itself about how that leads to rich discourse. I mean, I've just come back from a law firm today who hosted us for a wonderful widening participation event, hence my kind of croaky voice here. But I passed posters for inter alia and witness for the prosecution, hugely popular representations. One dealing, well, don't do any spoilers for those two. Go and see them if you haven't already. But there's a reason why they have been so widely watched and widely spoken about. Now, I'm not for a second, listeners, holding myself out as saying that Accident is in that category of performance, but I do think very definitely that the capacity for theatre in law classrooms and beyond for getting under the skin of cases is something that presents quite an exciting opportunity.
It is, and it also strikes me it's an exciting opportunity for people who are interested in it, because you have the stories are there. There's a whole largely unexplored sort of world of narratives, of intrigue, of plays with words. I think, going back to accident itself, what do you hope that audiences, especially non-lawyers, took away about the nature of justice after seeing the play?
I'm currently analysing the results of the questionnaires and the interviews. It's been very interesting to see non-legal audiences offer some perspectives on that. So an example of one that I was expecting to see is the lay audiences, so non-law student or non-legal professional audiences, were surprised that the two systems of justice are literally two systems, so that the civil courts were not bound by the decision of the criminal court. That, I think, was something I anticipated, but there's all sorts of takes that are coming through the results of the questionnaires that I hadn't envisaged at all. There's a lovely inconsistency as well. People have completely different takes on the overriding theme of the play. Was justice served? Which is an unanswerable question in terms of being right or wrong. It's a pervasive theme throughout. We represent that with members of the press asking the key characters for their view on whether justice was served, and looking at the answers or the responses, I should say, to the questionnaire and indeed interview. There are very different perspectives on that. So I think with non-legal audiences, and this maybe comes back to your first question, Helen, about why this case, it's accessible. The legal cases are built on, did this person intend to kill or cause serious harm to the deceased? It's something we can all relate to, I think, from watching court dramas. So it's the case that someone could just walk into the production and understand what was going on. It gets a bit more complex for lay audiences in Act 2, but the feedback is kind of confirming that it was something that was followed, right? The concepts were accessible at base level, and I'll demystify that a little bit for the listeners, because otherwise I'm talking about something that's in the abstract. The civil case, the case that the widow of the deceased brought, was for damages for negligent conduct. Did the actions of the defendant fall below a reasonable standard of care for someone holding and handling a shotgun? Again, that's something that I think any lay audience could understand. Oh, okay, so it's the civil courts are being asked to find for the claimant or for the defendant on that question. But the judicial reasoning then gets complicated. There are sophisticated arguments made by the insurer. There are sophisticated arguments presented by the defendant, and there are 5 civil judges that have to unwrap this by grappling with reasoning. And I was a bit concerned during the writing process as to how accessible that would be to lay audiences. And I'm very pleasantly surprised by the responses to say, well, that are basically saying that was something that they were able to follow.
And I think one reason it was easier to follow is because it was acted. I think reading about that, even as a play script, I think, but the backwards and forwards nature of the interactions and the way the responses to each other, I think really made that easier.
Oh, that's really interesting, Helen. Yeah. And what we wanted to do was to provide some reactive emotional hooks to that, which you wouldn't get if you were reading the judgment. With the Court of Appeal judgment, rather than present one judge's thinking and reasoning in one continuous block and then move on to the second and then the third, we interspersed the reasoning. So we didn't change any of the words, because it's that bit of it is verbatim, but we rearranged them and then we put in some character reaction, which I hope those devices made following the wording of what is essentially a complicated judgment easier for those lay audiences. Is there another way of making that even more clear? Is that something that we necessarily have to do given the feedback? So those questions I'm posing to myself and will reflect on as we move into the second iteration of Accident, because the inaugural performance, which is the one that you saw that ran in March, has provided us with a good platform now to re-edit based on what really worked well, what didn't, and we hope that we have a quote unquote better version of Accident for what we plan to do with it next.
were you all more interested in the legal questions or the way that those legal questions affected and the outplay of those legal questions affected people?
My position on it was I want to get this case into wider audiences because of what I said earlier about it being accessible, but also quite rich and complex. My focus was very much on how do I translate the legal arguments and the judicial wording in the judgments. Bryony, who is completely instrumental in all the bits that made the audience laugh and engage emotionally, brought that experience to the writing room, was very quick to say to me, Lloyd, that just won't work in that way. It's not engaging enough. So I was very much the lawyer, and Bryony was very much the specialist to characterize this case. But what happened through our journey of writing together is that those lines blurred, and I became much better at, I hope, getting into the importance of the journeys of the characters and their reactions to the legal cases. And Bryony got ever more invested in the nuances of the legal reasoning. And so again, I think that comes back to the interesting intersection between those two disciplines. So the simple answer to your question is I came at this from a lawyer, and had my first draft been the one that was performed, Helen, you would not be waxing so lyrical about what you had seen. And I think when you're representing a legal case, perhaps in the experience that can be drawn from accident, the sweet spot is to convene a writing team encompassing a lawyer and a playwright.
I think, and at this point, actually, probably it would be a good point to mention the King's players, who are absolutely outstanding. Like, it was
Absolutely
exceeded every expectation. I think they were utterly brilliant, and I think they were also, the way that they embraced this was a big part of the success in the delivery as well. I thought they were excellent. Last question. What's next? You talked about the collaboration with the Central School for Speech and Drama. So that's one avenue, but are there any other avenues you're exploring?
Yes. So that particular initiative, I'm currently working with their students, scaffold a little bit of law that's relevant to some materials that I drafted that are raw materials for them to work with as writing for performance undergraduate students. So they are working their magic to create a series of workshops, 3 workshops over 3 days in June. And I have some law student volunteers from our law and professional practice program and beyond, actually. And they're going to work together to hopefully have some fun. I think they will have some fun across those 3 days and come up with materials that we can take forward into the next iteration of those workshops or into aspects of taught modules on our law and professional practice program. So it depends what comes out of those workshops as to exactly which are the hooks and the materials that we'll be able to slot in, and we might be able to do something with in terms of skills building, assessment, those kind of things. So watch this space, and I'm very much open to see what comes out of the data sets that we get from the research project associated with those workshops. I think that they will land in terms of becoming a more regular series at the very least, but let's see what comes out of that. In terms of Accident itself, I mentioned that we were doing some re-editing. So Bryony and I are back in the writing room this month. We'll have a series of writing sessions together. We hope then to be able to send the script out to the participants from other law schools who came and watched the inaugural run, who might want to do the same kind of project with either their law students or their theatre societies, and they will have free license to use the script, and there's been some interest in that very happily. So hopefully Accident will be performed in its edited iteration at other law schools and possibly even back at King's in the 26-27 academic year. We would very much like to pursue some Arts Council funding to hopefully take it on some kind of run if we're successful with that kind of funding application process. We might have to do a second version and trim down the number of cast members. More immediately, you mentioned the Wonderful Kings players. The outgoing treasurer and president of the Kings players have very kindly joined forces with me to put a paper in for the King's Education Conference in June. So hopefully, if that's accepted, we will be giving a conference paper on what we've just been discussing, and I'll give a bit more shape to the research methodology and the kind of things that are coming out of that aspect of the project.
I'm really pleased that the collaboration with the King's players is carrying on. I think they were outstanding, and they got an awful lot out of the experience as well. I mean, they've said very nice things about how important it was to be involved in the sort of development opportunities it gave. So that was really, we have run out of time, I'm afraid, for today. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thanks very much.